Suaram, a leading Malaysian human rights NGO, would like to welcome again all media, both regional and Malaysian media, as well as members of the diplomatic community in Bangkok, to this exclusive press briefing on one of the most sensational and controversial corruption scandals in our country, Malaysia, and perhaps in the region of ASEAN. In a script befitting a Hollywood spy thriller, this corruption scandal surrounds the purchase of 2 French Scorpene submarines, whose price continues to escalate till today, the shocking and brutal murder of a glamorous Mongolian woman, the blowing up of her body with C4 explosives, the decision of the French courts to hear evidence about the alleged bribery of the top Malaysian and French officials, and the growing links between these spell big headaches for the ruling administration and especially for the current Prime Minister who was involved when he was then Defense Minister in 2002. And this is the first joint media conference between our French lawyer and the Suaram team, which is present today, Mr. Joseph Braham and also Ms. Cynthia Gabriel from Suaram. Following the commencement of a judicial inquiry at the Tribunal de Grande Instance in Paris that will probe alleged corruption, crimes, and illegal bribes involving top officials from both Malaysian and French officials. As was earlier reported, the Suaram delegation returned after a successful trip and hearing before Judge Leloir, one of the 2 instruction judges assigned to oversee this case on the 19th April 2012. The judge had principally accepted a list of 7 proposed witnesses, including current Defense Minister Zahid Hamidi, former Defense Minister and current Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak, the central figure in the procurement process, who is also a close aide to Prime Minister Najib Razak, Abdul Razak Baginda, as key witnesses that can further assist in the inquiry before the tribunal. And today we are here with our lawyer, following the famous deportation issue that arises last year when one of our lawyers was unlawfully deported from Malaysia when he came to speak at an event to brief us on the development of the case in the French court. And I would like to hand the floor to Ms. Cynthia Gabriel to further explain the press conference today.
Thank you very much, Fadia, and a warm welcome to all of you to this very important press conference. We, Suaram, we're based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, so we are very grateful to Forum Asia, of which Suaram is a member, to have actually helped us put this press conference together. And we're also very excited to learn of the presence of several embassies who are present here to hear for themselves, to hear from Suaram, and to hear from our lawyer from France, who's actually leading the case. What are the important and essential details that make this case quite different from the rest? And the very fact that we have to travel to Bangkok to have a press conference, the very fact that our lawyer is unable to enter Malaysia to speak to his clients, speaks volumes of the way in which the Malaysian government has been responding and has been reacting to this case. And we obviously know why, because when we first decided to file a complaint in the French judicial system, we realized that the persons involved in the case are those that are extremely high-ranking, both on the Malaysian government side as well as on the French government side. So we are dealing with a hot potato, and a hot potato that has landed us in Bangkok instead of in our own capital city, France. So I'd like to begin by actually explaining the status of the case at this moment, of which, of course, Joseph will help elaborate. But the first things that have happened is that following 2 years of investigation by the Public Prosecutor's Office in France, we now have the case officially opened on the 16th of March 2012. at the Tribunal de Grande Instance. This case is a civil case, a civil suit between Swaram and the shipbuilding company DCNS. And we're also very pleased to announce that a criminal investigation has further commenced. And I will leave the details of this to our lawyer to explain. And one of the other interesting developments that have arisen from this is that we now have privileged full access to the investigation papers. And there are 153 investigation papers that have been made available to us. During the time of the preliminary investigations, the investigations were closed. We did not really know what were the extent of the investigations, and we were not privy to it. And now we are. We have access to 153 investigation papers. However, there are several constraints that come with this, and French law provides certain limitations on the area of access. While we are not able to obtain hard copies, while we're not able to distribute to you the 153 investigation papers, we are, however, entitled to full view of them, and we are able to quote them to the media and to the public. And for those of you who have followed to some detail stories that have been published mainly on the internet, you will find that several exposés have already been done. And these exposés are pretty controversial and damning. And we felt that with the presence of our lawyers, we will continue to expose some very damning details that will help pursue and bring forward the investigations in France. So, in terms of legal jurisdiction, there are many questions that have arisen with regard to the long arm of the law. How many of the witnesses would actually show themselves up in France, for example? Would subpoenas that have been issued be valid on Malaysian soil? And if there is an outright denial, what else can be done? So these questions will also be further answered. But I'd like to also point out the fact that both Malaysia and France are signatories to the UN Convention Against Corruption. And that Malaysia, especially as a signatory of the UN Convention Against Corruption, is obliged to cooperate with other nation states in preventing, investigating, and prosecuting offenders of corruption. State parties are bound to render specific, formal, mutual legal assistance in gathering and transferring evidence for use in court, and to also extradite offenders if necessary. And an overarching trend in this convention is the whole area of universal jurisdiction. This means that a country can bring to trial and prosecute in that country those accused of having committed a crime in another territory. So, despite having signed and ratified this very important convention in 2008, we are very disappointed and rather shocked at the ignorance displayed by the current defense minister when he said that Malaysia will not cooperate in this judicial inquiry, and that Malaysia will not send anyone from the government to participate in allowing for information to be shared and for cooperation before the French courts. So we believe this is a very timely reminder to the Malaysian government, and I'm actually very, very happy and pleased to have the presence of the Malaysian embassy here in Bangkok present today, because it has been quite an uphill battle to get a response from the Malaysian officials with regard to the status of the case. So with that reminder, I'd like to further move on into some of the exposés and findings. Now, it's extremely important to have the regional media work with us on this, because you know that there is almost a 100% blackout in the mainstream media in Malaysia. Now, despite that, the internet is running riot with the story. The internet has been really publishing this story like as if this would be the main electoral issue. And you know that Malaysia is going to be having its general elections very soon. So there is a real disconnect, a real disjointed effect when you read the mainstream media and when you read the internet. So we hope that the regional media will cooperate, will see this as very important, because it does very much involve our Prime Minister. It does very much involve huge amounts of taxpayers' money. And we're talking about money that runs into billions of ringgit, into millions of euro that have gone unaccounted for and that have actually been transferred as commissions, which are now deemed illegal once France had signed the OECD convention back in 2002. Okay, the first of the documents that I'd like to just summarize and highlight is that as part of the procedures involved in the preliminary investigation, the French prosecutors had raided the office of the shipbuilding company and had obtained several very core documents, including the contract between the Malaysian government and DCNS, bank invoices, bank vaults, scrutinizing the accounts of the different companies. And this is how they had actually arrived at some of the information. And there was also several confidential reports that were obtained, mainly consolidated and mainly written for the French government. And one of the reports was obtained by the public prosecutors on the 2nd of June 1999 with relations to how the procurement process and the negotiations would take place. And in a document that was tagged Malaysia, there was two companies that were highlighted. The first was Perimeka Sindrian Berhad, and the second Terra Sasi. Both of these are companies that were formed mainly to receive sweeteners and illegal commissions in relation to the negotiations that have taken place. And the report includes a note on retracing the background of how the negotiations actually took place. The note states that pursuant to the major defense contracts between France and Malaysia, there is a requirement that substantial transfer of money has to be channeled to individuals and or political organizations. And the note specifically states that apart from individuals, the ruling party UMNO, the ruling party of the majority component party of the ruling coalition called UMNO, United Malay National Organization, is the biggest beneficiary. Now, if we did this press conference in Malaysia, everybody would be going ooh and ah, because UMNO has been in power for the last 55 years. And the very fact that this confidential report has actually explicitly stated UMNO as a beneficiary of the monies that were involved speaks volumes of how much corruption there is, not just in the administration, but within the political parties that make up the ruling coalition. The note further mentions that there were two individuals, Muhammad Ibrahim Muhammad Noor and Abdul Razak Baginda, as points of reference. Now, who are these persons? Who are these personalities? One is linked to former Finance Minister Tun Daim Zainuddin, and the second is linked to Defense Minister and current Prime Minister Muhammad Najib Razak. The note further explains that Muhammad Noor's influence began to decline when the Minister of Finance, Daim Zainuddin, was booted out of the cabinet. And so they decided that it was most suitable to have Abdul Razak Baginda to become the main point of reference. And one of the very, very revealing factors is that the note stated, on the contrary, Razak Baginda maintained excellent ties with the Minister of Defense and Prime Minister. Furthermore, his wife is a close friend of the Minister of Defense wife, Rosmah Mansor. And if you follow Malaysian politics, you will know that the Prime Minister's wife actually wields considerable influence over him. And she has also been a target of many critics for lavishly spending taxpayers' money on fashion, handbags and jewelry and so on. So it became very interesting to note that the relationship between the two wives had also led to the appointment of Baginda as a point contact. And Terasasi is further linked to Baginda, in which the directors are Abdul Razak Baginda and his father, and Peri Mecca, the directors are Abdul Razak Baginda and his wife. So it is an all in the family setup, a crony empire that was built around the procurement of the 2 submarines from France. Now that is document 97, and you will see that there will also be distributed to you the list of companies that the relationship between the companies will be further explained. It will not be distributed to you. It will be further explained because this is part of the investigation papers that we do not have rights to distribute openly. The idea behind trying to establish the links of the company was really to emphasize the fact that what was going on in the name of national safety and in the name of national security in terms of procurement of defense equipment and defense material for Malaysia was really the wielding and building of more and more corrupt practices, where family members were brought in, new companies were set up only to receive sweeteners and illegal commissions. And in this next expose, I think the most shocking thing to reveal was that once France signed the OECD convention in 2002, they began to shift away from looking at middle agencies that would need to be paid certain amounts of money. Instead, France was trying to do negotiations directly between government to government. But the Malaysian government had insisted that a Malaysian company be set up to deal with the negotiation and procurement process. So as a result of that, Peri Mecca was formed and Terasasi was formed. The difference between the two is that Peri Mecca is an above-the-board company, which many of us know, and many questions were also raised in Parliament. But Terasasi has been a company which has been mysterious up to this point. There has been no mention in Parliament, no mention in any of the newspapers, and absolutely nothing was known to us until the investigation papers came out. And even more shocking, we found out that Terasasi actually had a branch in Hong Kong, in which so far invoices suggest that 36 million euro has already been channeled into that account. And who is the beneficiary of the 36 million euro? Why was there a branch in Hong Kong? Was it to ensure that the money trail was actually hidden from the eyes of the Malaysians? questions such as these have no answers until today. And in fact, the information revealed in the investigation papers have raised even more questions. And Malaysians are left wondering what actually happened in the whole process of procuring 2 submarines. So many companies were formed, money was transferred here and there, and even a company based in Hong Kong had received so much money from the shipbuilding companies. And the investigative judge in France is actually looking at the relationship between Terasasi Hong Kong and an office that was suddenly closed off in Malaysia called Terasasi Sendirian Berhad. How were the linkage of the money shared between the two, and who were the actual beneficiaries? So the judge in France is paying a lot of attention to this mysterious second company. Now back to the first company, you will see in your press statement, document 87, the shock within this document is that an amount up to $1 billion was demanded through a fax that was obtained by the prosecutor's office, in which Defense Minister at that time, Najib Razak, had demanded for Perimecca's stay in the contract. For Perimecca to be involved in the contract, there was a demand of up to USD 1 billion ringgit. Now, of course, what was finally paid to Perimecca after lots of negotiations and many rounds of discussions was $500 million ringgit. Now, $500 million ringgit amounts to about 115 million euro. And that is really a lot of money. And that, ladies and gentlemen, forms the basis of our complaint in the French courts. It forms the basis of our complaint in the French courts. What was the 115 million euro paid out for? What was Perimecca set up for? The only answer that was given in Parliament was that Perimecca was a company set up to coordinate training and support services. But what exactly that meant, nobody really knows. And most shockingly, the financial statements of Perimecca in the following years had actually shown a huge degree of losses, in which they were unable to actually sustain their company operations properly, and they never actually received any extra income or showed a functioning company beyond receiving this 115 million euro. So we are really looking at a whole range of poor governance and bad practices on the part of the Malaysian government that needs their cooperation to fill in the blanks and to provide answers to the Malaysian people on what actually transpired during the negotiation process. Now, SWARAM is a human rights organization. It's a whistleblower. This thing came to our attention, and we do our part by raising the contents of what we think the Malaysian people and people in the ASEAN region need to know. Because if one procurement contract can go so wrong with so much money passed around, we shudder to think what else is going on between third world governments of other countries in this region and first world countries like France, like Germany, Russia, who actually sell arms and defense equipment to third world countries like ours. So it really is a big eye-opener. And especially also since ASEAN has a defense and political security pillar that speaks a lot about the need for a standardized security policy for the region, and how countries can actually share experiences in developing better procurement practices and so on. We'd like to make a point that this case has not just opened the eyes of SWARAM and Malaysians, but should be a reminder to all of us in all ASEAN governments that there's so much that's gone wrong in the name of national security and national safety. Corruption probably rears its most ugly head in this industry. Why? Because it is one of the closed, most secret industries in all of our countries. It's an industry that usually is tucked away under the guise of national secrets. And so it becomes an extremely important right for us to know, for Parliament to actually have a bipartisan committee, for example, to further study what kind of defense and security policies are needed. So before I hand it back to Fadia to get the press conference moving and for Joseph to speak, there are many more exposés that have raised our eyebrows. There were handwritten notes that were suddenly written and signed by the name Razak. And we know in the West, it's always the last name. People always call, for example, people would call Joseph Braham Mr. Braham. So people would call Najib Razak Mr. Razak. So there was a note that was signed with the names, with the signature Razak, asking for an urgent amount of 360,000 euro to be banked for support fee. And there was never really anything that was established as a support fee. And that money was paid. And the judge is now further investigating what support fee means, or what was the money paid for. The handwriting is also further being sent for sampling to determine which Razak is actually involved. And the judge is not dismissing the fact that this could have been very well the defense minister at that time. So these are just excerpts of some of the examples to show you the gravity of the corruption practices that have been carried out just by buying 2 submarines that cost 7.3 billion ringgit, and the cost seems to be further escalating because the issue of maintenance, the issue of repairs and after-sales service have not actually been incorporated. So one wonders what really was dealt with in the contract between the shipbuilding company and the Malaysian government. So thank you.
To invite our lawyer, Joseph Braham, to explain the long arm of law and the jurisdiction of the French court over Malaysian officials. As you can see that the defense minister and also the prime minister have been keeping quiet with regard to the development of the case as it was opened recently in the French court.
One of the things you might be wondering is why is there a judicial case in France regarding a corruption that occurred, an alleged corruption that occurred in Malaysia. And the first answer to this is, I'm sorry, I'm going to be quite blunt, but it's just that the state of the law in Malaysia is not sufficient enough to allow this kind of trial to happen. To be quite precise, there was that attempt seizure of MACC, Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. Of course, things couldn't work for reasons I let you guess. And the second reason why is that due to French legal system, when either French or when French are either victim or alleged author of a criminal case, then it gives jurisdiction to the French criminal courts. But this has a consequence. The consequence is that the only thing that is inquired in the French court is whether or not some French individuals, being legal or physical person, did bribe foreign individuals, foreign public officials. First, that is the only point under investigation in France. We are not at all, when I say we, I meant France, is not at all investigating regarding, for example, Altantuya Sharibu's murder and why she's been murdered and so on. This is beyond our jurisdiction. first thing. But it also has a second consequences. The second consequences is that these elements are falling under what we call UNCAC, United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And UNCAC, that is quite an interesting convention because it has been signed and ratified by, I don't have the exact figure, but I think it's 154 countries throughout the world. And this means that these 154 countries do compel themselves, do bind themselves to apply all the provision of the convention. And these provisions, in our case, state that all countries, for example Malaysia and France, will provide themselves international cooperation in criminal matters regarding corruption. This means that, in theory, because in practice I'm afraid this won't happen, but in theory at least, if the French judges were sending an international rogatory commission to the Malaysian police, the Malaysian police should be obliged to investigate the points that have been pinpointed in the International Rogatory Commission. Let's say, for example, that the Juge Le Loir asked to the Malaysian police to make inquiries on Terazazi Malaysia, one of the companies that was set up in Malaysia, to check who were the directors of this company, who were the shareholders of this company, where are the accounts of this company, and so on. The Malaysian police should be obliged to do so. And for example, Juge Le Loir could also ask to the Malaysian police what are the relationship between Mr. Abdul Razak Baginda, who is, we know it, one of the directors, or who was one of the directors of Terazazi, and Mr. Najib Razak, who is, as you might know, a Prime Minister of Malaysia. And these questions should be answered and should be inquired, should be investigated by the Malaysian police. This also means that if the French judges decide to subpoena any witness in Malaysia, the Malaysian government and the Malaysian police are to ask this person to obey this subpoena. Of course, it is most probable that due to political motives, some of the key witnesses being the Prime Minister, his right hand, let's say, or right arm, Mr. Abdul Razak Baginda, and some other person, would refuse to come. And it's also most probable that the Malaysian police will not compel them to come. But the thing is that in that case, international criminal law provides a remedy. And this remedy is called Interpol. Interpol is an international police organization. And if the witnesses do not come willingly and by themselves, the judges can decide to issue a warrant of arrest. And a warrant of arrest can then be internationalized through Interpol. Therefore, it becomes an international warrant of arrest. And every countries are obliged to respect this warrant of arrest. So, of course, once again, but maybe I am very pessimistic. But of course, I think that Malaysia will probably not apply this warrant of arrest if it is regarding its prime minister. But the thing is that this might prevent the Prime Minister from traveling around, because, of course, if he might have influence on his on Malaysian police, it's not that sure that he's got influence on French police, on English police, on German police, on US police, and so on. So what I mean here is that it's not because the case is handled in France that the responsible, the author, the alleged author of the corruption, or the alleged beneficiaries of the commission, won't be able to be found and to have to answer legally. That is one of the first points I really wanted to point out. A second element is I would just like to highlight two figures. First figures is 1 billion euros. This is more or less the total amount of the contracts, okay, for buying 2 submarines and for training the sailors. The second amount is 150 million euros. This figures is more or less, it's not very precise, but it's 149 and something million euros. This is the commissions, legal or illegal. This is another issue, but this is the commission paid in this case, paid either to Terazazi, either to Perimeca. And what can be said by respecting presumption of innocence? Yeah, presumption d'innocence. Okay, by respecting the law, is that this commission, for the moment, this 114 million euros commission to Perimeca and the 36 million euros to Terazazi have not. We have, for the moment, let's put it this way, not found in the file any logical reasons for paying such amount of money. There is, to give you a simple example, on Terazazi, they have been paid 36 million euros for officially commercial engineering. What does that mean? And the inquirers wondered, okay, so if Terazazi has been paid such an amount of money, it at least must have given reports to DCN, to Thales, I mean to the French companies. And therefore, the inquirers asked for all the report. And they had been given public information. They had been given information that were totally available on the internet, on the newspaper, and so on. Apart from one document. One of these documents was a secret document owned by the by the Malaysian Royal Navy, not Royal, Malaysian Navy, yeah, Malaysian Navy, and this document was the evaluation of the offer for the submarines. Because I have to say now that the process usually is that a country who wants to sell submarines makes offers, and once the Malaysian government is interested in the offer, he makes it be evaluated by the Navy, sorry. And this document, of course, is crucial for the country who wants to sell the submarines, and of course it's highly confidential. To give you an example, in France, these kind of documents are a top classified document. You can't have more secret documents. If you release them, you can go up to 10 years to jail. And this is exactly the kind of document we're talking about. And the only interesting element that Terazazi gave to Thales was this top classified document. So two possibilities arise from here. Either Thales accepted to pay, Thales, let's say the French part, accepted to pay 36 million euros in order to get this classified document. That would mean that Thales paid in order for someone to make an offense. Second possibility is that Thales, the French part, sorry, paid to have, that this 36 million have been paid in commission for, as it is stated in document, I think it's 87 or 97, I can't remember which number it is, but he has been paying this in order to channel money either to UMNO or to individual, high-ranking individuals, as they say in the documents. I think that this demonstrates, without any beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt, that two things: the French parts knew that this money was not legally speaking, should not legally speaking have been paid, first, and second, that this money was due to high-ranking individuals or legal persons in Malaysia. Third point I would like to highlight, it's the huge amount. Of course, I do not know exactly Malaysian budget, Malaysian official budget, but 114 million euros could have made hundreds of hospitals, hundreds of kilometers of roads, hundreds of university, hundreds of anything else than getting into some individual's bank account. This money that has been legally or illegally, but this will be said by the judges, but that has been paid to individuals for no reasons, for no foreseeable reasons, could have been used for the Malaysian taxpayers. To put things bluntly and clearly, if this money hadn't been paid to high-ranking individual in Malaysia, then this money would have allowed a Malaysian taxpayer either to pay less taxes for the same services, or to pay or to have much more services for the same amount of taxes. This means that the Malaysian taxpayers are the first victims of this case. Legally speaking, all Malaysian taxpayers cannot be a party to the criminal complaint in France, therefore it's only Swaram. But this, in my view, is one of the most important things to understand. This kind of crimes, this kind of offenses are not as cannot be seen as are not as I'm sorry, I don't find my word in English, are not as picturable as usual crimes like bloody crimes like murders and so on, but they kill more people. They have much more important consequences than a small and petty murder. Sorry for the small and petty, but this means that these people accepted, I do not know how many people who died because they did not build a hospital that could have been built, accepted that some Malaysian taxpayer won't be able to go to school, and so on, and so on, and so on. And therefore, in order, as a kind of a conclusion on this aspect at least, it's not because we can't see the corruption that it doesn't have consequences, and it's not because these consequences cannot be precisely evaluated by each person that we, or Malaysians at least, do not have strong consequences on their daily life.